The Valley Current.
Hey, Bob, you're sounding good. Wow, you got all your certificates on the wall. That's a lot of certificates behind you.
So the idea is to bring this guy into it.
I like that.
And so let me see if I can't set it up a little better.
Wow, that house has mahogany doors, a mahogany ceiling. That's pretty amazing.
This place is great for wood. It really is. Tropical hardwoods, all waterproof. It's really something. I don't know if this is going to make sense, though. What I want is to show everything from Japan, which is here, to the Persian Gulf, or even the Red Sea. But if you're not going to see any details, there's no point in it.
No, the details are there, and we could obviously bring a map on the screen in a second.
So a flat map of Asia, basically.
Yeah, but I'm interested in all the certificates that are behind you because it looks like you've got some advanced PhD certificates behind you.
Actually, every time I give money, they give me a certificate of appreciation, and I've gotten a whole wall full. No, it's really true.
Wow, that's a lot of appreciation, I have to say. What it reminded me of,
I've got another stack to put on the far side now.
You don't know this, but what it reminded me of is we had a room. It's since been disassembled, but we had a room at the firm that I had all the certificates, all the stock certificates of all the companies that failed that we invested our time or money in Silicon Valley that failed. And it was like just as many certificates on the wall of all the failures. And each one told its own story of 99 out of 100 companies in Silicon Valley fail, but you get to know the founders and they often become serial entrepreneurs, and then they come back to you and maybe they learn something the first, second, or maybe even third. We have one that's now fourth time around. He's hoping to be successful after, three other failures. Usually by the time it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 failures, usually they're too old to restart. But, sometimes they do. So that's what that whole certificate thing reminded me of. But that's a certificate of appreciation from the university or from the city or from the town or all the above.
No, they're from, some are from Saponavong University, some are from the town because I gave the town some money, some are from a temple because I gave the temple some money. They're rigorous about that.
That's beautiful.
And the funny thing is, they don't do EFT. That's really bloodless. They want the actual physical cash stuffed in envelopes. And then, no, really. And then you give the guy the envelope stuffed with cash. On the outside, it says what it's for and how many million GIP it is. Big letters. And then there's a handshake up, and then they take photos, and then they give you the certificate. It happened again just yesterday.
So I'm kind of curious. It's not because they feel like you have to have this for tax reasons, as in the U.S. In the U.S., you have to have something back from whoever you give a gift to.
So no, nothing like that.
Right.
It's customary to give certificates of appreciation, and I collect them like box tops. I really do.
So you have what looks like at least a couple of dozen.
Yes, well, I've got exactly a dozen on this wall, and I've got another half dozen to add at the farther reaches of the wall as soon as I get around to it.
Okay.
So as I was saying, they don't like EFT. They like cash and envelopes. Meanwhile, I can give money to them directly, but only if I want to sack the tax benefit. If I want to use the tax benefit, I have to use an American 501c3.
Right.
A little further back, so we include everything from Japan to Persian Gulf. If you've got a map of all of Asia.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start with
any of these Southeast Asians are good.
Yeah.
Okay, a little bigger.
A little bigger than this.
Right? That's good, but I would like Japan and.
Japan's not in this, huh? Well, let's see.
No, it stops at Taiwan and it stops at Southeast Asia. So I really, really want India and the Persian Gulf.
Okay, hold on.
Just a map of Asia.
I'm kind of curious. You're teaching geography now at
I
the
wish I
university.
were.
You're not
I wish I
teaching.
were.
You're not teaching.
It's very, very centralized here. If I
Yeah.
were an American, I wanted to give a course in the geography of the Mekong, I would just say, I'm giving special studies 198, geography of the Mekong, period.
Right.
Okay, nobody would think twice about it. Here, I would have to get the Minister of Education to approve a change in the curriculum. That would only take 3 years. I mean, it's
Oh,
just impossible to get it to change without a lot of central oversight. So I can't. Instead, the course, you'll laugh. You'll think this is funny. The
mhm.
course was in English for IT professionals. No kidding. But it turns out that there's a lot of logical crap about IT. So if you keep your eye on the ball, what's this all about? And for IT professionals, not in the engineering sense, but in the business sense. So how do you figure out what the total cost of operation is? What steps go into developing a website? And that I could do.
So you actually,
So it worked okay.
you're actually
I
teaching,
reached the farthest limit of my knowledge, but I did it.
you're actually teaching IT
But
in the
I,
context of
I,
teaching English. You're teaching English in the context of IT.
I'm teaching. I'm just teaching a medley of English and IT issues for in the economics department. In other words, business considerations about IT and in the context of presenting it in English.
Wow.
So I gave some vocabulary, some grammar, and some decision making in IT.
Wow. So all your work at Davis, Stafford, Kelman, and Fenwick that became Fenwick, Stone, Davis.
Yes, they'd be proud of me, I'm sure.
No, seriously, all that stuff really paid off, right? If you think about it.
I don't think, no, I mean, to be honest, not that I want to throw any spitballs at them at this late date, but no, basically, how do you make a decision about um, which computer to buy? And there are like five variables. One has a warranty, one has free training, one has the software is not free, the other has an extended warranty, and blah blah blah. So you add together the five or six variables, and you come to a conclusion. The kids here are very, very weak on conceptual issues, very weak. So, for example, one of the questions
very
on the
weak on
midterm
what on
was,
what?
let me see if I can remember it.
Very
One of the
weak.
questions on the midterm is which of these two programs is cheaper? And the first answer is Gimel is cheaper. Second is Dalit is cheaper, and the third, excellent. Okay, good.
All
Still
right,
not there, but okay, let's go.
I got a big map of Southeast
Yeah,
Asia,
let's do it.
including China. You're the expert.
Okay, so
You're the
while
expert.
we're doing that, I'll finish the sentence. So there were two computers, which is the more expensive? And answer one, computer one is the cheapest. Answer two, computer two is the cheapest. Answer three, you don't know because computer two charges per call for service, and you don't know how many calls there will be. So
Right,
that was the correct answer.
right,
Good. Then the
right.
next question is, why should the client not buy computer two? Answer, computer two is not the cheapest. Well, you don't know if it's not the cheapest.
Right.
You just told me you don't know. And then you go and check that anyway. I mean, they're really not thinking things through at all, at all.
So
And it's
you're
actually kind of shocking. I had one brilliant kid, and I would like to give her a scholarship and send her to Thailand. I really would. And two are kind of competent, and the others are basically just going to do what they're told because they don't know any better. It's really amazing how much a rote education does not give the student.
yeah, so you're really teaching critical thinking in some ways.
Yes,
You're teaching critical thinking, which is
yes.
obviously a key skill that everyone should learn in probably even grade school, in fact, maybe even kindergarten, right? maybe even
Well, it comes
40.
naturally to me to think that way, but apparently not. You don't develop it sui generis. So people don't take you by the hand.
So how many students are in this
We
class?
had 22. It was a
So the
good
22
group.
students, you'd say the top 10% is like 2.2 students or roughly.
Yeah, I would say we had one excellent student who deserves to go on and do bigger things, two quite competent students, four, well, all right, and the other 14, 15, well, they tried.
That's
Nice
like
kids, though, I must
that's
say.
like that's like startup companies. That's exactly how it breaks down. You'll have one or two that are clear home runs
It's
or
exactly how the
uh,
world breaks down.
that's the 80-20 rule, right? That's the notion that, 20%
Hmm.
accounts for 80%. And, basically a lot of the world revolves around that
Basically.
decisions of 20%. Well, these days it might be the decisions of 1%. But we're now looking at a map of Southeast Asia. I got the whole friggin' map up here. And we're looking at really China as the dominant.
China is fine. Vietnam is fine. Japan is off the map, but I can say Japan is off the map. We've got Taipei, we've got the Philippines. Okay. What we don't have is the connection between this and the Persian Gulf. But I'll just tell them there is one. Let's go with it.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
con-
Okay.
conceptually, the hotspot in the world, as we all know, is what's going on in Taiwan because a lot of manufacturing.
Well, I would amend that. I would say this body of water, the South China Sea,
Mhm.
has two exits to the. Can we go up a little bit? Can we go move it up a little bit? Up, up, other way, other way, other way,
Oh,
other
yeah,
way,
wait, okay.
other way, other way,
What
other way. Ah, okay, right there. So it has. Put it back. Up, up, up.
this
Move it
way?
up.
This way?
No, no, the other way, the other way, the other way, other way, other way. I'll tell you when. Other way. Good. Okay, so there are two entrances to the South China Sea. One is here at Singapore at the south end, and the other is at Taiwan at the north end.
Right.
And and the point is, Taiwan commands the exits from the South China Sea. So if Taiwan goes to China, the South China Sea goes to China. Conversely, if the South China Sea is Chinese because of Chinese military power, okay, naval power,
Right.
then Taiwan's independence means nothing. And the reason it means nothing is China and the South China Sea blocks all of Taiwan's trade routes, either getting oil from the Persian Gulf, which is why I wanted it, or selling stuff to Europe. Okay. So
Right.
Taiwan and Japan and Korea, for that matter, cannot exist economically if the South China Sea is closed. So if China closes the South China Sea, that's it for Taiwan. Conversely, if Taiwan is Chinese, that closes the South China Sea. In other words, Taiwan and the South China Sea are like the yin and the yang in one of those, um, you know, interpenetrating little diagrams.
Right. So in the
So I
U.S.,
don't say Taiwan.
in the
I
U,
say the
in
whole
the
schmear. South China
in
Sea plus Taiwan are two sides of the same coin to me.
right. So in the U.S., we have an analogy. At least the current administration thinks we have an analogy in what's going on in the Panama Canal. Right. The U.S. wants to take over the Panama Canal, and some hedge
Yeah,
funds
I heard that.
have bought rights or have bought out some of the interests of the Panamanians. I think the Panamanians owned it, and now that some hedge funds have paid a huge amount of money, U.S. based hedge funds or investment funds, private equity funds, have paid a lot of money to control various companies that run the Panama Canal or operate in the Panama Canal. And I don't know if that's going to change any of this, but it seems like imperialism is sort of the word of the day. If you're looking at what's happening in the world, maybe it started with Putin invading Ukraine and sort of winning portions of Ukraine. Obviously, there's a war going on. Maybe to some degree, you could say the same thing is happening in Israel with respect to Gaza and the Gaza Strip. That's a separate controversy, a separate hot zone. The Taiwan Chinese issue is a hot zone, obviously. And now our US president is talking about taking over Greenland. And I guess the latest thing I heard or read somewhere is that he's
Well,
talking about maybe to take
he
over
is,
Canada.
and frankly, from the geographer's point of view, just looking at North America as a unit kind of makes sense to me, frankly.
Right, right.
And I know it does, and I don't see what Denmark's interest in Greenland is, or whether Greenland is going to get a lot of goodies from Denmark. That connection just means nothing to me, frankly.
Well, isn't there a bunch of
And
oil
Greenland
and
is
gas?
too small to be an entity by itself. I think the Canadians should have made this move 20 or 30 years ago, frankly,
The
because
Canadians,
that would make sense.
the
But
Canadians should have made a move on Greenland. Is what you're saying, right?
yeah, but you know, Canadians, they're not pushy,
Right,
right? I mean, they're not.
right. But is the play to Greenland an eventual play that moves to Canada for the U.S. from an imperialist point of view? Like
Yeah.
if you take the view that
Imperialist is not.
that the
It's a
world,
yay boo term. It's not an analytic term.
right,
So it is, it isn't, whatever. I mean, the point is, doesn't make sense in what calculus?
right. If you take the view that the world is now concentrating into maybe seven powers, maybe five powers, and the North America power would be U.S. dominant and would include Canada and Mexico, and
Mhm.
there would be obviously all of Asia as a group would be dominant by China. I don't know how that
Well,
works.
if it is, baby, it's really game over. If we had a larger map, I would
Yeah.
take a compass and I would draw a 2,000-mile radius circle centered in the South China Sea. That would include Japan at the northeast end. It would include mainland Southeast Asia at the southwest end. It would include China at the northwest end, and the Philippines and Indonesia at the southeast end. Anyway, within that 2,000-mile circle are more than half the people in the world.
Okay, so
Okay, there are.
but put
And we haven't even gotten to India yet. So if um, if China can assert its dominance over that, then for that reason alone, China would be the big deal in the world. In addition to that, now let's think about Japan, Korea, Taiwan, selling things to Europe, buying oil from the Persian Gulf. All of that depends on hegemony over the South China Sea. So if China controls the South China Sea navally, then the independence of mainland Southeast Asia. Ah, beautiful, 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 beautiful.
you
Good.
like that,
Stop,
huh?
stop, stop. Okay, here's the circle I was talking about. I'll use my finger. Okay. So I want all of this 2,000 miles from here. I was wrong. Takes in India, takes in Indonesia, takes in China, mainland Southeast Asia. More than half the people in the world live in that circle.
Yeah.
And pretty soon, more than half the economic activity in the world will be within that circle. So that's the first point. And the second point is Japan, Korea, Taiwan depend on oil coming from the Persian Gulf through the South China Sea. Their exports to Europe depend on going through the South China Sea. If you control the South China Sea and the countries around it, you are the big power in the world.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that can stack up to that. So what I was
So
going to say a minute ago is that yes, there are other hotspots in the world. There's Ukraine, there's the Middle East as usual. Maybe there's Greenland and North America. Good, beautiful, beautiful.
mhm.
Maybe there's Greenland and North America. But of them all, which is the most important? You can argue that Ukraine is more important than the Middle East, or Middle East is more important than Ukraine. But you're arguing about who the runner-ups are. This South China Sea, China, Taiwan, mainland Southeast Asia. This is number one. It really is.
Conceptually, what you're saying in so many words is that if you take the view that we are seeing an imperialist era and some sort of consolidation of power around the superpowers, people used to say there were seven superpowers. I don't know if that's true anymore. We can kind of say what.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm
I,
saying
I'm.
there's one. I mean, there are various contests going on around the world. Ukraine and Europe certainly is one of those contests, but the most important contest by far is the one I'm talking about. So as a matter of priorities, this is where I'm focusing my attention.
Right. Are you worried?
So
Are you worried? Are you worried that eventually the Chinese would take
I
over?
think we just blew it. I think we seriously just blew it. And the signal issue is not. It's really not personal to Trump. Apparently, that Waltz character set up the meeting and invited various people, including a journalist, God knows why. Apparently, with Signal, like with Facebook, you can set up an ad hoc group and you
Right.
add members to the group one by one.
Right.
And when you add a member, all the other members of the group know that you've added the new member. So how could that possibly be inadvertent? He must have been half asleep or drunk. Honestly, there's just no way to stumble into it otherwise.
Right.
But but having done that, okay, um, I was just reading when you were a kid. Did you read the Hardy Boys,
Yes.
The Secret of Pirates Cove?
Yep.
Do you think the Hardy Boys would share The Secret of Pirates Cove with with Mike Waltz? Are you kidding?
Right.
I mean, intelligence cooperation is a thing of the past. It just is. And moreover, it'll stay a thing of the past. I mean, let's assume it's 2028. The world is still somehow staggering on. And then Kamala Harris becomes president at last. Oh, thank God. Do you think that'll solve the problem? Of
No.
course not. People
No.
still will think, A, these people are a bunch of flakes. And B, okay, Kamala's not quite the same flake as these guys, but they'll be back in 4 years or back in 8 years. We can't make security arrangements with these guys anymore. We can't. And that is the permanent detriment of the Signal thing. Trump himself was not personally involved, but it doesn't matter.
The
If
blunder.
people are not going to trust us enough to cooperate, then they're not. That's all.
Right. So the blunder, in your view, that blunder has a repercussion forever.
Well, I do think so, but it's not by itself. Um, Tearing up treaties like NATO, and by the way, I'm not against a thoroughgoing reform of NATO, and we can discuss why. But it's really tempting to stop now and discuss why. But I'm not against that conceptually. I think NATO made sense in the 60s and 70s, but in the 80s, with the fall of Russia and the rise of China, a security arrangement that made sense for the 60s and 70s no longer makes sense. It's just not fit for purpose now. So I don't mind that Trump wants to rethink that whole relationship. When the Signal issue came out, and one of the things they said in the course of the Signal talk was, those Europeans, they're so hopeless, they're so cheap, they're so this and that, they're such losers.
Right.
And I sometimes read the English press, The Guardian,
Right.
and that's what The Guardian picked up on. Oh no, Vance called us a poo-poo head. We're not poo-poo heads. I mean, that's what really got them. Well, excuse me, you are poo-poo heads. You seriously are. We've been hearing from Trump wanting to undercut NATO for 8 years.
Right.
And what have you done about it to date? Third year of the war is over. We're now in the fourth year of the war. What have you done about it? Literally nothing whatever. I mean, they're poo-poo heads, face it. Okay? But so I don't have a problem with Trump turning his back on that, on Europe, or the security arrangements of 40 and 50 years ago. But why is he doing it? Is he doing it so he can redeploy American assets to deal with the South China Sea? That would be nice.
Right.
I could support that. Or is he doing it because he doesn't care about foreign relations that much? He just doesn't. He's got a domestic quasi-revolution going on, and he's focused on that. What happens in the South China Sea, I don't think he could find it on a map, honestly.
Yeah.
He just doesn't care. So he's getting rid of the NATO commitment, not in order to make a new commitment or strengthen a commitment elsewhere where it would matter a lot more, to me at least. He's doing it just to shuck all these foreign engagements. Well, China has a big seaboard on the South China Sea. It's extremely difficult to confront China in their own home waters. You can imagine China trying to make a big deal of the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, whatever. Could
Right.
not be done. It's impossible. It's going to be extremely difficult to confront China in these waters.
Right.
And how could we possibly do it? China outbuilds us 10 to 1 in shipping now. How can we possibly do it? We need Japan. We need India. Okay? Vietnam has nothing but seaboard on the South China Sea. Vietnam's independence does not exist if the South China Sea is Chinese. Okay? So we need these people to join us in balancing China in the South China Sea, or it's game over.
Right. So let me just
Yes,
summarize.
and are they going to do it?
Hold on.
So
Hold
is
on.
Japan going to say, gee, those Chinese, if they take the South China Sea, it's curtains for us. We ought to help the Americans to confront them. Is India going to say that? Is Vietnam going to say that? Well, maybe 10 years ago they would have said that. Now, are you kidding? You can't cooperate with these people. They're not even interested.
So Bob, hold
So
on a
they'll
second.
make their own arrangements. And what will their own arrangements be? India is already a nuclear power. Japan is going to be a nuclear power. Korea is going to be a nuclear power. It's going to be nuclear proliferation city. They're not going to make the same mistake Ukraine made.
Right, Bob, hold on a
And be
second.
defenseless.
Bob.
It scares the hell out of me, frankly.
Right, hold on a second. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Let me just summarize a couple of things just to make sure I'm tracking your comments. If Trump was actually doing a redeployment of troops into what you think is the much more significant theater of
Yes.
American force, which is the South China Sea. So move everything out of NATO, everything out of Europe, and basically say to the Europeans, you deal with Europe.
Yes, and he's right about that. It is a European problem.
It's a European problem. It's not an American problem. And frankly,
And Europe has like 10 times the population, 10 times the size of the economy, and 5 times the population of Russia. What they need us for is a mystery to me, honestly.
right. So if he said, look, we have to pick our battles. We cannot be the police person, whatever that is.
That's right.
We can't be the world police.
Before the rise of China, we could put chips in the Persian Gulf and the Ukraine or wherever. Now we cannot.
Right.
If we wish to confront China, we must pull our chips into that locus. Must.
Right. So that would actually make sense to you from a political, geographic point of view compared to what might be viewed as a much more haphazard approach of just saying we're not doing this anymore without saying why we're not doing this anymore, except to save money, I guess. That's his big picture, to save money.
Yes, that was the funny thing. So I started to say that in the famous Signal meeting, Vance is starting to talk about, oh, those Europeans, they're poo-poo heads.
Right.
What was the next thing he said? The next thing he said was, and here we are cleaning out the Houthi problem and cleaning out the Red Sea. And are they grateful? We have to charge them. We have to figure out some way to charge them for what our Air Force is doing to the Houthis and get that money back.
Yeah.
I mean, what a parochial, itsy bitsy little point of view.
Right. Right. But
right? I mean,
but it's actually the same problem. The pirates that do what they do on the waters that are being challenged, and that these airstrikes presumably were meant to stop, right? These airstrikes were meant to say you cannot pirate American ships or any ships that are running in these waters.
yeah, you cannot close a major world trade route because you have some gripe with Israel.
Right. And your point is
But
we've got
Vance
this.
goes on. Europe gets 30% of its shipping through the Red Sea. We get 5% of our shipping through the Red Sea. Why are we pulling their chestnuts out of the fire? We have to charge them for this. We have to send them a big bill and figure out how to get the money. I
Right.
mean, what a thing to be concerned with.
Right. So, on the bigger picture of this current imperialist view that appears to be happening at least three different ways, maybe four different ways, because isn't there a fight going on between India and Pakistan all the time? Isn't there a conflict
Well,
zone there?
sure, there are always geopolitical issues going on. I mean,
Right.
of course.
But so if you look at it, I'm trying to remember the seven great powers and how they rank. The U.S. was, maybe still is, at the very top, right? China is number two. They'd probably say they're number one. The third is India, right? Because India's got a huge and growing population, right? The fourth is what? Japan used to be the view of Japan.
Well, Japan had this thing about we don't want to spend money on defense.
Right,
The U.S., as you know, spends 3% on our gripe with Europe is they're still below 2%. Japan has historically been at 1%.
right,
So it does not sustain a very big military on that.
right,
They have recently announced that because of the rise of China and the threat of this and that, they're going to boost their defense spending by 50%. Stout fellows. That brings them up to 1.5%.
right, right.
Okay, so no, Japan is not a major military factor yet. It may
Right.
become one.
But from an economic point of view, they probably would be viewed as the fourth power.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And then the fifth.
Definitely number three, yes.
And then
India's, I think they're number three, and then Germany and France and Europe and England are four, five, and six, and then India is seven. Though India is doubtless moving up very quickly.
Right. So let's re-rank those seven in the imperialist view of what things look like by 2050. You would say, or someone might say, if nothing happens, China takes over as number one for sure, because they control most of the population and most of the waterways of any great importance, right?
They control the major trade waterways, the majority of the world's population, and the majority of its productive capacity. Assuming India's independence is subverted. If India's independence is not subverted, then China's still number one, but the lead is not so totally overwhelming.
And number two is the U.S. at that point?
Yes.
Because right now the U.S. would say it's number one and China's number two. And we would shift.
Right now, but I suspect that'll be history in about 5 years.
Well, that's kind of what this DeepSeek announcement was, is like, we're actually ahead of you in AI because we can do it faster and cheaper and we can multiply it many times over because basically we know how to.
I don't know. What's your opinion?
I have to tell you, it was a big surprise to a lot of people. And part of it was the view that, well, if you want to make everything open source, realize you're going to get people that are faster and smarter, that are overseas and willing to work a lot harder than US people are willing to work, including even Silicon Valley people. And they're going to produce better results faster because you've allowed them all of the base infrastructure to do that. And that's what DeepSeek represented in many ways for a lot of people, that China maybe has an ability to leverage those assets better than even we do in the U.S.
Well, my opinion of who's ahead in AI is not worth listening to. But
Okay.
I do know you sent me a video of drones doing construction work or some fantastic thing like that.
Right.
Do you remember?
Right.
And in terms of land transportation, they're developing trains that go 1,000 kilometers an hour.
Right.
I mean, you just look around and your jaw drops. They're just miles ahead in that land transportation, miles ahead in drones. Maybe they're miles ahead in AI too, for all I know.
But today it would be US, then China, then what? Japan? What's number three?
Economically, yes.
Japan, right?
Yes.
Economically. And in the future, probably Japan drops, right? And India gets to number three, right?
Okay, but my point is that China, I mean, number one, two, and three on a global scale doesn't matter as much as the specific context of here in Asia. Confronting China in South America, okay, they want to take they want to take over the car market in Brazil or something, okay. But here in Asia, it's a much tougher proposition. Here in Asia, China is inherently number one. And the only way the U.S. can even think of challenging them is through cooperation with India and Japan. Okay. And maybe Vietnam and Thailand and the Philippines.
Correct.
So that would be number one against numbers two, three, four, five, and six. And then we would have a shot. But as I say, who can cooperate with the U.S. under these conditions? Is Japan going to turn over, its state secrets to us? Is India going to base its defense policy on the administration in Washington? Cooperation is a dead letter.
Right. So just remind me.
So I think we're going to lose it, is what I think.
Well, that's what a lot of people have been predicting for a while, but they never do it geographically. They always do it economically. And your point, which I think is quite incisive, is geographically, it all comes down to who controls the South China Sea. And that's what
And,
the Taiwan.
and again, Taiwan is, you mentioned Taiwan. That's not off point. I think of the two, I think of Taiwan as the core, as the cork, and the South China Sea is the bottle.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So if the bottle goes, the cork doesn't matter. If China owns the cork, the bottle doesn't matter.
Right.
So it's really two sides of the same coin.
Right. But let's go through just quickly, just for an analytic reasons. Today, economically, the view is U.S., China, Japan, then what? Europe as number four.
Then Germany, I believe, is still there.
We'll
And
just
I
call it.
believe France is still there. India must be coming up very quickly, though.
Right. We'll call number four the EU. Right.
Yes, that's fair enough.
Today, but we'll say that what probably happens in the future is India becomes number three. It's China, U.S., India. The future being 50 years from now. And I don't know where Europe is. Is Europe then still number four? Is Japan slot in as number four and Europe goes down to number five?
Well, what's all this in aid of? When we get your league table, what do we do with it?
We just do an analysis of kind of the game board, like the seven powers. If we say there's seven great powers, I think Russia is not really such a great power economically, but they're obviously.
You certainly wouldn't think so.
Right?
Right? You would think Germany, the UK, and France would say, "Oh, don't sweat those Ruskies.
Right.
We have like 7 times their economic power just among the three of us. Never mind Poland and Sweden and whatnot. We'll just kick their ass back to." No, they can't do it. Okay, well, they may have a big economy, but they're incapable.
Well, they're not as unified for sure, even though it's called the European Union. They're not really unified as much as you would want them.
They're not unified at all. They've been facing the Trump problem for 8 years and have nothing and have talked. And all they have to show for it is talk.
Right. And you could argue that the Brexit thing that happened actually weakened the potential for unification, where UK was part of the EU years ago.
For sure.
Right. They weakened the potential force that might have faced up to Putin. But Russia generally is not high on the list of economic powers. That's kind of one of the things I imagine that Putin.
No, you're absolutely right.
Maybe they're number 7. I'm trying to think of what the 7 are, because we say today it's U.S., China, Japan.
My understanding is that they are half the size of England.
Right. From an
So,
economic point of view. From a landmass point of view, of course, they're huge, right?
yeah.
From a landmass point of view, there's just a huge landmass. I mean, it's hard to believe how big it is because it's got to be like the biggest in the world, right?
Oh, for sure.
Right? Pretty much.
No, for sure.
And
If we do take over Canada, I think it'll be a contest. But unless and until that happens, it's no contest.
I mean, here's Greenland, right? Am I looking at Greenland now? Is this Greenland up here? You remind me.
Yes.
Right here?
Yes.
Yeah, isn't that Greenland? That white.
Yes, it is. Yes.
And what's the thing below to the south of Greenland? What is that?
Iceland.
That's Iceland.
It's Iceland.
That's Iceland. Sorry, Greenland, Iceland.
This is how, by the way, just a little side note. Why does Denmark own Greenland?
I don't know.
Okay, and the answer is
Yeah.
it didn't originally. Originally, Norway, which just fell off, Norway sailed to and discovered and took over Iceland and Greenland. And so
Okay.
they were part of the Norwegian crown. Later in European history, there was a union of crowns between Norway and Denmark.
Okay.
Then during the Napoleonic era, Sweden defied Napoleon and joined the Allies and was rewarded after the fall of Napoleon with Denmark. Okay? At that time, Greenland was part of Norway come Denmark.
Right.
And then Sweden took over Denmark at the end of the Napoleonic War, but they just forgot about Greenland.
Right.
It's just like hanging out there.
Right.
And so Greenland got Denmark.
Wow.
That's why.
Denmark
What
got
have they done
Greenland.
for what have
Denmark
they
got
done for
Greenland.
Greenland ever since?
Right.
Nothing. I mean, the idea that there's some sacred obligation to keep, Greenland Danish makes no sense to me.
So I'm still trying to figure out what are the seven. I'm just saying, if we look at the rankings, GDP by country, right? There's actually is a website that does it. It's U.S., China. Then they put Germany as number 3, but I would just call the EU as number
Couldn't
3.
be. I don't believe it.
That's what they say. They say the table.
I don't believe it. I just don't.
You don't think Germany's 3? 4
I
is
think
Japan,
is
5
certainly
is
number
India,
3.
6 is UK, 7 is France, 8 is Italy, 9 is Brazil, 10 is Canada, 11 is Russia, 12 is Mexico, 13 is Australia.
Okay.
Now, I would re-rank these based on, the EU, but they're doing it by country. They're not doing it by political union, right? So
So the question is, do you put France and Germany in the same bag? And this brings up the question of intra-European relations, which are headed south.
Right.
And the question is, how far south?
Right.
And I really don't know how far. But they are having something like the Trump phenomenon in Europe as well, in which the old parties, Republicans and Democrats have never been weaker. The Republicans are not an independent force. They're like a wholly owned subsidiary of Trumpism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The old party structure is just gone. The same thing is happening in England. Labour Party is quite weak. Reform, which is kind of the right wing thing, is gaining fast. The Tories, the old right wing thing, are kind of dead. In Germany, the far right, they call it far right, Alternative for Deutschland, is now number 2. In Italy, the brothers of the Fratelli are now number 1. Okay. In France, the National Front under Le Pen is now number 1 or number 2. We'll find out at the next election. And all these countries are fairly national. All these right-wing parties, the Fratelli and the AFD and the Front National in France and Reform, they're all fairly nationalistic. And cooperation among them is not a certain thing at all. So whether Europe will count as one entity 10 years from now or not is an open question.
Right. And I guess whether the U.S. actually somehow extends its reach north and south into this ginormous maybe even south into South America, right? If you really want to take a view of what the U.S. could try to do.
Well, we always have. I mean, we've always thought of them as our backyard,
Right.
and I don't think they like it.
But
And why?
we
And
can,
will Brazil go on accepting American hegemony indefinitely into the future?
right. But we couldn't even take
Well,
over.
economically, maybe not so much.
I mean, we couldn't
The
even take
Trump
over.
tariffs may reserve the American market for Tesla and Ford and whatnot, but Brazil could care less about that.
Right.
Meanwhile, China, the BYD in China it can outsell any American company by 50%. They're going to take the Brazilian market
That's what I
and
think.
the Argentinian market and the Chilean market. And these
Right.
places will be economic appendages not of us, but of China.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
Right.
that's a good prediction. I think your prediction is correct because the Chinese have figured out a way to
No,
introduce.
that's the strange thing about Trump. He presents himself as this aggressive world shaker, but what he's in fact doing is building a wall around America and trying to protect America, the American manufacturers, by giving them American consumers.
Right.
Well, cool, but that leaves out the whole rest of the world. And the
Right.
whole rest of the world is not going to be part of that little arrangement.
So let's go back to your globe that was on your desk. You had that
Let's go
globe,
back to, I'm sorry?
the circular globe, the physical map that you have
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Pull it up, just because that's the 3D version of the world. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so there's your globe. There's your camera on the globe, and
Good.
you basically present a view about an area of the world that is a hotspot. The Chinese have taken kind of the long view, right? Pretty much that they will eventually take control of the South China Sea. And
I don't see how not. At one time, 6 or 8 years ago, people recognized this threat. And by people, I mean there was an organization called the Quad. And the Quad was the US, India, Japan, and Australia.
right,
And with Vietnam kind of helping to present a counterweight to China in the South China Sea. Well,
right,
you haven't heard much about the Quad lately.
right.
Okay, India just walked away from it. They
Mm,
can't rely on America to make their security arrangements anymore. And Japan is going to walk away from it. Japan will get an independent nuclear deterrent, and that's it. Vietnam, whose independence is completely dependent on the South China Sea. As you can see, here's Vietnam. If the South China Sea is Chinese, Vietnam's independence is nominal.
right,
It just has no other frontier. Okay? So you'd think that they would be part of this American come Japanese come Indian resistance, but
right.
they're not. And they have a history of defying China that goes back over 1,000 years.
Hmm.
They fought with them as recently as 1979. But their position now is we are strictly neutral. We will not take sides. We will not allow foreign forces on our soil, by which they mean the Americans.
Hmm.
We will not cooperate with other countries. And we just do not have an active foreign policy. Well, that's music to China's ears.
Right, right,
That's all China wants is a free hand. They don't need to
Mhm.
fight everybody.
right.
So how we can possibly maintain a contest by ourselves without the help of China, without the help of India and Japan, and with Trump not all that interested in the South China Sea to begin with? I mean, give me a break, honestly.
So it is kind of a perfect time for Xi to decide to invade Taiwan and to sort of make the muscle apparent the way you could argue Putin has done. He's made his muscle pretty
Maybe.
apparent. And
At one point, I thought they would wait, but there becomes less and less reason for them to wait. When they have clear naval and air superiority, again, locally, not in the world, but in the South China Sea,
Right.
and when Trump is off on some crush the court or whatever domestic concern he's involved with,
Right.
and when Japan has backed off, there's really not much for them to wait for.
Right. Right. So, Bob, this has been quite interesting. Thank you for making the time. I know it's like, what, 7 or 8 p.m. there?
Coming up on 10 p.m.
10 p.m. Thanks for staying up for me. I love all your awards in the background. I love all the gifts you're doing. You're changing the lives of people in Laos, that's for sure. You're probably the best.
I forgot to say, I didn't finish that story.
Yeah.
So I was working with a 501, so if you don't mind extending for a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was working with a 501c3, and they were providing the service of transferring my money to the university for nothing.
Of course.
Why? Because it gave them a chance to do junkets, and then 3 of them, it's like $5,000 or 10. So for $5,000 or 10, they would send 3 people to Laos and investigate everything very seriously. I mean, come on. I mean, you know, but when we did the handover ceremony, in other words, stuffing the envelope full of bills and writing 20 million GIP on the outside, okay, I thought they would find it funny. So I sent them a picture of this, okay? And they didn't find it funny. Cash? You gave cash? You have a receipt? Maybe they took the money and went to Macau? Are you crazy?
That's funny.
And I found a bunch that was not hysterical about nothing, but it was funny.
But you still have very much a cash economy because you built that beautiful mansion that you're in with pallets of cash. With pallets of cash.
And for 10% of what it would cost you.
Right, absolutely.
No doubt.
No question. There's a zero question about that, Bob. You have a palace that would cost at least $5 million US, and probably with the view of the water would be more like maybe $50 million US. And
I don't know. Well, it would be high. You'd have to pick the analogous American location and then decide.
Well, it'd be like Lake Tahoe.
I just recently signed a contract, finally, to develop the garden. We've got about, I don't know, even 220 square meters. And I just signed a little contract, and the work should be done. And then comes the rainy season, and then the house is all ready, and you and Lee can come. I would suggest late October, if you can arrange that, beginning of November.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be terrible, frankly.
So Bob, I put on my U.S. Coast Guard hat in reflection of the U.S. would need to take steps to protect all the interests, including the interests of people in Laos, because of the Chinese move on all this. I guess you guys become dominated by China as well in Laos, right?
Oh, that will happen anyway. If you want to do a thing on the Lao economy, China just built a railroad from Kunming to here and continuing on from here to Bangkok and then Singapore.
Wow.
And it's the best thing that ever happened to Laos.
I bet.
But it means Laos owes China a lot of money.
Absolutely.
And Chinese manufacturers will flood the country.
Right.
And basically China's going to pull the strings. But they badly need the railroad. I didn't see anybody else lining up to give them a railroad.
Nope.
So that's just how it is.
That's how it is. That's how it goes. That's the infrastructure approach to making things happen, to having influence in the world.
Building road.
Build
That's
a road.
the building road in action.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Hey, Bob, thanks for coming on. Thanks very much. Take care. We'll do the thing on Laos next time. Talk to you later.
Okay, good.
Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.